For more, let's turn to Austin McKell. He's a freelance journalist with more than 4 years on the ground in the Middle East. Earlier in the year in Egypt, Mr McKell was arrested and charged with incitement while trying to interview Labour activists. Those charges were later dropped. Austin McKell joins me now from Cairo. Austin McKell, you're at Tahrir Square, or near there at least, the heart of discontent. What are things looking like there at the moment?
Well, at the moment in Tahrir Square, there's not much going on. You may just be able to hear in the background the Friday noonday prayers which are currently happening. It's after these prayers that you'll see supporters and opponents of the president probably take to the streets. Today will be a really decisive day in terms of showing of numbers on the street in for and against, I would expect.
And Austin, the images we see here, obviously the feeds we get are so often of Tahrir Square, also the social media we're exposed to. In your experience on the ground there, are those images representative of the majority of the Egyptian people?
Well, I would say no, is the short answer. There was a poll conducted by Basira, which is a fairly reputable polling company here in Egypt, during this crisis, and it showed that Mohamed Morsi still had 57% support. That's down from a historic high of 78% earlier in the year, but it's still much higher than the number 33, which answered that they were displeased, which is actually up from 15%. So surely public opinion is swinging against Morsi following this decree, but it seems like there's a very large segment of the population that want the constitution to go through and want Morsi as their leader still. I would say that 33%, that third of the population which are very anti-Morsi, are more concentrated in the cities, and they're much more cosmopolitan and more able to communicate with the outside world, so perhaps they're being a little overrepresented in the outside media. It's also worth noting that the opponents of Mohamed Morsi are really composed of two groups at the moment. One would be those you'd call the secular revolutionaries, who took part in the January 25 uprising and in fact were key to it. And then on the other hand, you have the seculars of the old regime, people who would have voted for Ahmed Shafiq in the last presidential elections against Mohamed Morsi. He was the candidate of the old regime, a former prime minister of under the Hosni Mubarak regime, and he was and his supporters are also out in the presidential palace and clashes like that. So that by itself has also given the Islamist side a feeling that they are the ones now carrying forth the revolution. You really have both sides feeling like they have the revolutionary high ground. It's quite a dangerous situation.
Okay, and if you were to move outside of Cairo there, Austin McKell, and take your microphone to people outside the cities and outside those metropolitan areas, what do you think the people there would be asking for and saying?
Well, if I managed to do that without running into difficulties, it's still quite difficult for foreign press to move around the country. I think you'd get a much more pro-Ikhwan line. That's not an endorsement, it's just a statement of what I take to be the facts. And I think most people who look seriously at the numbers would say the same thing. There's an element to which you could say that the seculars, what they actually fear is not a dictatorship by Mohamed Morsi, but the electoral strength of the Islamists. There's a lot of talk about inclusion coming from the secularists, but it's not clear how you would have an inclusive process that reached a consensus between groups as diverse as the fundamentalist Salafis and the liberal seculars. What the Ikhwan would say is that what they represent is the middle ground, and that what they're pushing is a compromised constitution, and that there's a minority trying to prevent the vote from taking place.
Let's talk about that then. How effective would a referendum really be? What question do you think might even be asked in that referendum? And also, there is a lot of scepticism around that electoral process, like you've mentioned. So do you think that really this referendum can be something that can even sort of quell, I guess, the discontent in Egypt at the moment?
Well, we saw big protests like this before the first referendum held just after the fall of Mubarak, before the presidential elections and before the parliamentary elections, and those elections all went ahead. So I don't see, there's been talk that the judges won't participate in supervising the election, and I mean, it's worth exploring why that is. What's really going on here is a conflict between the judiciary appointed under the Mubarak era, under the Mubarak regime, and the elected government. That's the conflict that's happening here. Earlier in the year, Mohamed Morsi moved to displace the top prosecutor, the top judge in Egypt, actually in a very gentle way, offering him the ambassadorship at the Vatican. And when he moved that way, he got very little support from secular revolutionaries, although they have been calling for this, this exact move, for this guy to be gone, because he's been obstructing prosecutions of police who killed protesters and corrupt regime officials. So when he was unable to do it within the law, when he was unable to do it the easy way, he's bundled it up with the constitution, which is another thing that he feels the secular forces and the judiciary in particular are being obstructionist about. The judiciary had dissolved the parliament and were moving to dissolve the constituent assembly that the parliament had chosen, and that would have completely derailed the transition process. And that would have been, in a sense, I think what you're seeing here is obstructionism on the part of the opposition. They want Morsi to fail, and then when he fails, they'll blame him for that as well.
And Morsi, obviously, within his ranks is not going so well either at the moment. Four of his advisors resigned, I think, just a couple of days ago, 3 last week. That's about 7 out of 17 in his inner circle. Why are they leaving, and who's going to stand behind him then?
I don't think it's right to call them his inner circle. What happened when he took the presidency is he gave everybody sort of soft jobs. I mean, for example, when he got rid of Tantawi and Annan, the 2 top guys in the Egyptian military, he didn't fire them. He promoted them to presidential advisors or some other kind of kicked upstairs kind of move. And that's what a lot of these presidential advisors, people that the Islamists wanted to bring into the fold, but who were never really their allies. You've seen actually, I think, a great deal of outreach from the Islamists towards some people within the secular groups, but that's mostly been rejected. Now, the seculars will tell you that this constitution is unacceptable, but the majority of Egyptians won't. I think there's an interesting fact about Egyptian politics that I think helps the whole situation make sense. A Pew poll conducted, a very rigorous poll conducted by Pew earlier in the year found 80% of Egyptians believe in Sharia law. 80% of Egyptians believe in democracy as well. So that means you've got at least 60% who are saying yes to both those questions. And that's the Brotherhood's base. They see themselves as the party of compromise between the hardline Salafis on the right and the seculars on the left. And they are going to probably push ahead with this vote, I would say, unless there is a massive display of people power by the seculars today and in the coming days.
And Austin McKell, obviously so much intricacy and so many levels of this story within Egypt. Let's talk about foreign pressure finally. The US president again expressing deep concern over the recent deaths and injuries. What is the reaction where you are on the ground around these statements from foreign leaders?
Well, I mean, the seculars are quite angry at the Americans, I think, and part of that is and this really cuts to the core of what's dangerous about these protests, is that some of them seem to want the deep state or the army to come back and protect them from the Islamist majority in the country, or at least to sort of counterbalance that majority. What the danger of that is, of course, is that you'll have the army return to a sort of overt leading role in politics, which no one openly says they want anyhow. The reason that's unlikely to happen, I think, is there's been quite sensible, more enlightened than usual leadership from Washington on this, and that the army has been told to stay in line and follow the orders of the elected president, at least for now. And that's really the crucial deciding vote in this whole thing, is the army.
Austin McKell in Cairo, thank you so much for the update.
Thank you.